So today I'm going to be talking about Ray Krone, and that's who I chose to do my case analysis on. So for my case overview, on December 21st, 1991, Kim and Krone was found murdered at the CBS Lounge. It wasn't until August 8th of 1992 when Ray Krone was convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping of Kim and Krone in Phoenix, Arizona. The conviction was primarily based on biomark evidence, and in which Krone was initially sentenced to death, but this was later overturned and he was reconvicted, receiving a life sentence. After serving over a decade in prison, DNA evidence in 2002 exonerated Krone, leading to his release. The real perpetrator was later identified through the same DNA evidence. So for the investigation process, police did gather extensive evidence which included fingerprints, blood, saliva, hair, and shoe prints, but most results were inconclusive. When investigators found Ray Krone's name in Kim's notebook, they immediately went in on him as a prime suspect. They collected a bite impression from Krone, which shows here I included a picture of it, and a forensic dentist claimed it was consistent with the bite mark on Kim's body. However, several key pieces of evidence contradicted this. The shoe prints didn't match Krone's size, fingerprints at the scene didn't belong to him, and DNA results were inconclusive. Despite these inconsistencies, investigators maintained their focus on Krone. During the prosecution, the case did focus almost entirely on biomark evidence. The star witness, which was Dr. Raymond Rasson, presented a video comparison showing what appeared to be a perfect match between Krone's teeth and the victim's bite mark. The defense challenged the credibility of this evidence, but other evidence like fingerprints and DNA that excluded Krone was minimized or explained away by the state. The jury convicted Krone in 1992 and sentenced him to death. 10 years later, new DNA testing definitively identified another man, which is Kenneth Phillips, as the true killer. Krone was then exonerated and released in 2002 after spending more than a decade in prison for a crime he did not commit. For the case analysis part, for the investigation, I thought about 4 main points that I wanted to talk about. One of the biggest issues first was confirmation bias. So basically, once police learned Krone's name was in Kim's notebook, they immediately focused on him, interpreting every piece of evidence in a way that confirmed their assumption. So basically, all because they saw Krone's name in her notebook, every evidence they saw, like the shoe prints, the fingerprints, they all just assumed it was him, so they didn't even test it. Another issue was cognitive bias. Dr. Rasson's testimony and methods did raise concerns about cognitive bias in his forensic analysis. His reliance on image manipulation and controversial theories, coupled with the defense's challenges to his credibility, did highlight how subjective interpretation can influence forensic results and can lead to biased conclusions. The next issue was subjective evidence handling, which, as I said before, they did rely on bite mark analysis, which, as we have learned in class, has a 65% false positive rate and lacks both interpreter reliability and scientific validity. Finally, trace evidence such as a shoe print was poorly handled because it was measured by sight without instruments, showing low retest reliability and weak scientific control. So basically what I mean by that is they saw the shoe print, and instead of actually measuring it if it matched with Krone's shoe size, they just saw it and assumed it was automatically his shoe print. Now for the prosecution part of my case analysis, as I mentioned before, the prosecution also did build their entire case around the biomark evidence. But according to what we have learned in class, as we know already, biomark analysis is one of the least reliable and least valid forensic techniques. So the fact that this was used as the centerpiece of the case does show a major scientific flaw. The technique simply does not measure what it claims to measure, which is validity. And jurors were also never told about the high error rate. And then for my second point, juries are known to be highly persuaded by forensic experts, even when the science is weak or subjective. Dr. Rasson's confidence, credentials, and a visually persuasive video presentation did make the evidence feel scientifically correct. Meanwhile, the defense expert was just a dentist, not a forensic dentist, as you can say. So jurors did trust Rasson more, based more on status instead of science. So basically, they only trusted him more because they did hear that he was a dentist, but they never checked if he had any credible evidence or reliability. Jurors were also misled by scientific language, interpreting consistent with as certain match. As our class, as like I have learned in class, basically jurors do often overvalue forensic certainty and struggle to interpret random match probability statistics. And lastly, the prosecution's late disclosure of the comparison video denied the defense a fair chance to challenge it, which is a serious breach of procedural fairness. Now for our reforms, I did include four reforms that I do believe will help. For the first one, I said for blind or double blind forensic procedures that they should have been required. In class, we did learn that when analysts know a suspect is already targeted, confirmation bias can distort their interpretation of subjective evidence. So basically, if the forensic dentist had been blind to the suspect's identity, there would have been far less pressure, conscious or unconscious, to force a match between Krone's teeth and bite mark. Second, courts should require the reporting of error rates and reliability evidence for forensic techniques. Basically, as it's outlined in the Daubert standard. In class, it was showed, as I mentioned before, that bite mark analysis does have a high false positive rate and low iterator reliability. If jurors had known how scientifically weak bite mark evidence actually is, it would have been impossible for that evidence to serve as the centerpiece of the case, as there was other evidence to look at, just as the shoe prints, the fingerprints, and then just the DNA on Kim. Third, the juror education must improve. So basically, jurors often cannot interpret scientific uncertainty and tend to overestimate the accuracy of forensic identification. If jurors had been trained on understanding reliability statistics and wording like consistent with, they would have seen that the evidence was not proof and just possibility. Finally, separating forensic analysis from the goals of prosecution could reduce pressure and bias. When forensic experts work within or for the prosecution, there is a natural motivation to confirm guilt, which we know increases confirmation bias. If independent labs did handle forensic interpretation, the evidence would have been evaluated more objectively rather than shaped to fit the prosecution's narrative. And then lastly, these are my two sources that I used for my presentation and my analysis on Ray Krone. Thank you.